Welcome back, guys. This is the second episode of our podcast named QueerNation. We are your hosts, Tanya and Kelly, and we hope that you enjoyed our last episode. Previously, we were talking about the development of nationalism in Ukraine and Russia after the Soviet era, and how the differences in nationalist moods took on a new development and diverged further from each other after the events of 2013, as well as the subsequent Euromaidan movement and the later invasion of eastern Ukraine by Russia. We discussed what impact these developments had on the LGBT movements in both countries. Also, we discussed the cooperation or its absence between the state and LGBT organizations and what special features it has in both countries. In today's episode, we will lead you through the latest news and events in Ukraine and Russia linked to Pride Month and LGBT communities. June is traditionally the month of Pride marches around the world, when the LGBT community joins all their forces and marches of Pride. This year, almost all the events have moved to online, allowing for a significant geographic expansion, and it allowed to organize Pride marches even where the authorities prohibit meetings in the street and do not even allow the registration of LGBT organizations. That's what Tatiana Vinichenko said about it.
Government institutions do everything to make LGBT organizations invisible in Russia. It is impossible in Moscow to register an LGBT organization. That is, all our organizations are invisible to the state and operate without state support, unlike developed European countries or the United States of America, for example.
And Verhovsky adds to this.
Really, legally, no, there are no limitations. But we always may see some misuse of the law. Officials may say that such organization potentially may propagate homosexuality to those who are underage, which is illegal, according to well-known law. And even if activists say that they do not work with any children, officials may say that we don't believe. That's it. Or we had a case, but it's old enough when organization, I forgot if they lost registration or they could not get it. It's the old story. Because it was kind of maybe marginal case, but it's well known when organization lost registration and could not register because homosexuality it somehow decrease the childbirth rate. So it's a demographic problem, and demographic problem is a security problem. So registration such an organization is a threat to security.
But this year, Russian activists managed to organize the first digital pride in Russia. It was organized by the team of the queer magazine called Открытие, or Open in English. Throughout June, Russian and foreign artists performed at the venues of the online magazine. There were organized public talks with interesting people, lectures on Russian queer culture, gender, and sexuality, about LGBT people in the media, cinema, and literature. Also, during Digital Pride, experts shared advice on how to address LGBT legal issues and find support. Andrew spoke of the importance of legal support.
Очень малый уровень правового
If
сознания.
there is a very low level of legal awareness of the LGBT community, we need to increase access to specialized legal assistance. We need to publish more tutorials related to self-protection of law. Yes, we do need that.
During their interview, Andrew also spoke about the difficulties transgender people face in Russia, which they know firsthand as a transgender person. During our conversation, they told a story.
Было дело брянского трансгендера
There was a
Мишель.
case of Bryansk transgender Michelle, Mikhail Krivetsky. You can Google it. and there he had no right to receive hormonal therapy because there was no official, as it should be called, special medical prescription, and she took it herself. And plus, when she was in detention, there was questions about the condition of detention, because it was dangerous to be in a communal cell. And she was held in solitary confinement for the duration of the investigation. So it was a real question of human rights violations, because the person was in danger. She published 3 pictures of anthropomorphic characters on the internet, and the characters were painted, they were animated images, not photographs. And she was imputed to distribute pornography with images of minors for these 2 pictures. And one picture was of an adult face, although it was painted animal characters. They weren't people.
And such things happen very often in Russia. For example, in early August this year in Penza, a transgender woman, Kira, was placed in the men's ward of a psychiatric clinic, all because of an already deleted comment on the social network about the revolution and violence against the authorities. That is, the woman is accused of calling for extremist activities, and the medical commission decided to place her in the psychiatric ward as part of this process. Kira also said that hormonal drugs were taken away from her, without which a woman may have kidney and liver problems. Andrew mentions.
Yes, we have a lack of our doctors, a lack of information about needs, special needs of transgender people, a lack of information. We need to gain more specialists which work the specialists like psychiatrists and endocrinologists. And in Moscow we have two institutions which have official license for assists for transgender people and people with mental desires. And if some person would like to address to official institution and would like to have to obtain the status of transgender person, it would be very difficulties for him or for her.
Another notorious event took place in Moscow. Thus, the LGBT flag was hung on the US Embassy building on June 25, the day the voting on the amendments to the constitution in Russia began. Thus, the embassy celebrated the Day of the Rainbow Flag. June 25, 1978, it was first used at the Gay Pride in San Francisco. Later, the British embassy was joined to this action too. And then it began. The flags were called a provocation and aggressive LGBT propaganda. The American and British ambassadors were offered to fine and check their suitability. Dmitry Peskov, presidential spokesman, also commented on the situation with the flags. He said that no flag was visible from the Kremlin and promised that the Russian Foreign Ministry would pay attention to this incident. Valentina Likhashva, she said in her interview that it's quite difficult to build any relationship with Russian government because there are several laws that can block their work, and there are eternal accusations of propaganda by the government and society. But at the same time, she says the following.
And in one day, same-sex marriages will be accepted in Russia. This is like it will happen. This is a trend of our society. But how many victims will be before? This is a question. How long we will be in this dark time? This is a question.
Being Pride Month, which in Ukraine lasts until October 11th, there have been many LGBT initiatives and newsworthy events, a couple of which we would like to share with you now. So in recent months, LGBT issues have been discussed and many educational projects for the public created to inform people about LGBT issues. We wanted to quickly highlight a project we found to be important, namely the Museums of Acceptance project. It's an interactive online museum that takes you through the experiences of parents with LGBT children and their journeys of acceptance and growth. It is really a touching and important project highlighting just how important the message of I accept you really is. The project was supported by the National Democratic Institute in Ukraine and the governments of Great Britain, Sweden, and Canada. With this campaign, you can share your own story on social media and share how you learned to accept your loved ones, friends, or yourself, or just express support for the LGBT community. Check it out at www.ridni.com.ua. That's www.ridni.com.ua.
No one can resist an idea whose time has come. I think it's a question of LGBT people. This is a large social group in Ukraine, which remains in a discriminatory position, so it cannot last long, so it cannot last forever. Ukraine will definitely be a pro-European country. Ukraine will definitely ensure all the basic rights of LGBT people. The question is what it takes to work, and we work.
Another initiative occurred on the 21st of June in the Ukrainian capital. Kiev Pride activists held an action called Mother Will Understand and Support, where they hung the pride flag from the Sword of the Motherland monument, which is a relic from the Soviet era. This is a huge statue, 62 meters or so, and the activists only managed to hang the flag with the help of a drone. They posted a video on social media with the statement, Motherland for Equality for All. A big LGBT flag is flying all over Kiev today, to be continued. This event was also the inspiration for our podcast cover art, which depicts the flag on the Motherland monument. Tanya, what were your first thoughts when you heard about this action?
Well, I thought how cool it is that LGBT community does this kind of campaign and this kind of action to show the citizens of Ukraine that they are there, they are present, they are important, also important part of the society. And yeah, this was like the biggest campaign, I guess, of LGBT community, not mentioning the LGBT pride marches. It was huge.
Some of the comments were shocking. Things like, minorities are minorities, that's why they're so named. You don't have to make a majority out of a minority like a lot of people are trying to do now. And others said, there are plenty of problems in our country. Why do you have to create another one? And I remember what our activist Vladimir Beglov said, that LGBT people will always be scapegoats or blamed for things. On the same day that the pride flag was being hung, there was an explosion in one of the Kiev apartment buildings, and someone in the comments said, while all the capital's attention is focused on the tragedy of the house explosion, LGBT people are flying their flags over the city. Why? Because today, in addition to everything, on Father's Day, they want to mock us. And Vladimir said the same thing happened during the war.
Because we already hear there is a war in a country and you are holding parades, or coronavirus is in a country and you are talking about the Istanbul Convention, etc. There is this pyramid of hatred, and we know that it all starts with an unpunished negative statement. And a negative statement leads to the isolation of certain groups. Society's permission for isolation leads to action to discrimination. And then actions and discrimination lead to genocide. But it seems to me that we are on the verge of action and discrimination because of crisis.
But the counteraction wasn't just limited to comments on the internet. Tanya, what comes to your mind when you think of so-called opponents of the LGBT community?
Yeah, the first one is the church. I think about the role the church plays in spreading LGBT propaganda, and this was a topic of discussion for many of our activists. And earlier we quoted Andrei saying there are two main opponents of LGBT groups, the first being nationalist groups, and the second, he said, were the churches.
Our second opponent is the Ukrainian churches and religious organizations and activists. They are not that aggressive, but they are much more influential. They still have influence within society, and they have much more opportunities for lobbying. MPs and politicians are more inclined to listen to them.
Exactly, the church. And you know what they did? Representatives of the Christian youth in Kiev raised a blue-yellow flag with the inscription Ukraine for Family above the monument of Motherland and recorded a video message claiming to defend traditional values. One of the organizers said, "We, young people who profess traditional Christian values, strongly condemn attempts of aggressive propaganda of the LGBT community on cultural monuments of the capital." According to him, LGBT activists committed the abuse of hoisting their rainbow flag over the monument of Motherland on the eve of the day of mourning and honoring the memory of war victims. But LGBT activists responded in favor of this action because they said they're also for Ukraine and also for any kind and any form of family.
Ukrainian society largely is homophobic, but this homophobia is not active. We do not see active hostility or aggressive attitude, except from the far-right organizations. They are an exception. For the rest, society is indifferent, and we see that in recent years the attitude has been gradually improving. Society is getting used to LGBT issues, and we associate this not only with our activities. I would say that this is connected to some permanent processes and to affirmation of the pop culture influence. When people see it every day on TV and the internet, then they, in the end, begin to get used to it and stop paying attention.
Come back next episode where we'll talk about the church, civil society, and its influence on LGBT organizations.